So last week we were in chapter 12 of Revelation. We were introduced to the dragon, also known as Satan. We saw that through the death and the resurrection of Jesus, Satan lost the battle in the heavenly realm. When Jesus was resurrected and exalted to the throne, Satan was cast down. He was hurled down to the earth, and therefore no longer able to accuse the people of God before the throne in heaven. But he's still a deceiver. He's still out to deceive the people of God here on earth. And so now at chapter 13, we're going to see once again that John, the author of Revelation, is challenging the story that Rome was telling about itself and its emperors. They're not the ones who've overcome evil. They're not the dragon slayers, as we talked about last week. And in fact, today we're going to see that they're actually working alongside the dragon. The emperor is actually empowered by the dragon and ruling on behalf of the dragon. They are not the ones to be worshipped. As I said, Satan's a deceiver, right? I think most of us realize that. Satan is a deceiver. But he doesn't usually deceive through obvious, overt evil. He's more subtle than that. He deceives by pretending to be good. He deceives by looking good. And he doesn't usually pursue people directly. He uses the things of this world. And he uses the worldly kingdoms. He works through earthly kingdoms that vie for the hearts, the allegiance, and the worship of the people of God. So I want to start in this way. Right before this, we recited the Apostles' Creed together, right? And in the Apostles' Creed, we stated that we believe in a triune God. A triune God. We believe in one God who exists in three persons. Now, I don't want to get into that and explain exactly how that works and all that, but that's what we believe. We believe in one God who exists eternally in three persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. We call that the Trinity, right? Hopefully you can read my writing. Trinity. Now, Father, Son, and Spirit, or the Holy Spirit. The triune God, or the Trinity. We see that, a picture of the God who's three in one throughout the Scriptures. And we actually see it here in Revelation as well. We see the sovereign Father who was, who is, and who is to come, who's the one ruling on the throne. He's ruling and he's reigning. He's the one who has all authority. All authority. We see the Son who was dead but is now alive again, right? This Lamb who was dead but alive again. My writing's not the best. Hopefully you can read it. This Lamb who's slain and at the center of the throne, and the only one who's worthy to open the scroll. He's the one who's overcome. He's the one who's triumphed. He's the one who's conquered. How do I spell that? Conquered. Right? We've talked about this throughout this series. And how has he conquered? He's conquered through his sacrifice. We see the Spirit in Revelation as well. The Spirit who's at the throne. He's before the throne as well. And we see his animated breath. His animating breath bringing to life the martyred witnesses. Breath and life. We also see the Holy Spirit sealing, marking marking the believers who follow in the way of the Lamb. We see his mark. Marking the believers who followed in the way of the Lamb by laying down their lives. We see the Holy Spirit empowering this great multitude of people, this kingdom of priests, this united kingdom of priests, the people of God from every nation, every tribe, every tongue. This is the triune God that we worship. This is the Trinity, the three in one that we worship. It says in Psalm 113, verses 4 and 5, the Lord is exalted over all the nations, his glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God? Who is like the Lord our God? We just sang about that. The one who sits enthroned on high. Who is like our God? Can you say that with me? Who is like our God? No one. No one. Now, in chapter 13 of Revelation, this is the chapter, this is where we've arrived this morning, and this is the chapter where people usually get the idea of an antichrist. Antichrist is actually not mentioned in this chapter. In fact, it's not mentioned at all in the entire book of Revelation. However, what is described here in this chapter, chapter 13, along with chapter 12, they kind of go hand in hand, chapter 12 and chapter 13, as well as chapter 14, which we'll see here in a little bit. What's described here in these chapters is an anti-Trinity. An anti-Trinity. Or, some call it the unholy Trinity. So let's take a look at chapter 13 of Revelation. If you turn in your Bibles, we're going to split this up into two sections here. We're going to read the first section here, verses 1 through 10. Follow along in your Bibles or on the Bible app, or just listen as I read. I'm just going to start right at the beginning. Verse 1, I'm going to read through verse 10. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had the feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast its power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. We talked about the 42 months last week, 3.5 years. An incomplete and perfect time, a time of suffering, a time of persecution is what it represents. The beast was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. So last week, we were introduced to the dragon, right? The dragon who had been hurled to the earth. The dragon. The evil behind all evil. This dragon. Now he's, according to chapter 13, he's standing beside the sea. Right? And for Jewish people, the sea represented chaos. The sea represented evil. And we actually see that throughout the scriptures. We see it in the very beginning in Genesis. When God speaks order, to his creation out of these dark, chaotic waters. That's how it's described, speaking order from this chaos, these dark, chaotic waters. We see it in Job and in Psalms and Isaiah, where we read about this serpent-like, dragon-like monster from the sea called Leviathan. We see it at the end of Revelation as well. Revelation chapter 21. John says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." We're going to talk about this here in a few weeks. "And there was no longer any sea." Why? The earth's been completely transformed. There's no longer any sea. There will be no more evil. All evil will be completely obliterated. Like I said, we'll come to that here in a few weeks. So there's the dragon. And in this chapter, we just were introduced to the beast from the sea. Beast from the sea. The beast represents the incarnation of Satan, the dragon. This image of the beast rising from the sea is taken straight from Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, and I encourage you to read Daniel chapter 7 this afternoon. Read it sometime this week. It's an incredible chapter. In verses 2 and 3, Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." These four beasts from Daniel's vision represent oppressive kingdoms, empires, nations. The Babylonians, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks. One of the beasts looks like a lion, another like a bear, another like a leopard, and then finally the fourth beast has these 10 horns, this 10-horned beast. And the horns represent different kings, different rulers. It says all of that right in Daniel chapter 7. Read it on your own. Here in Revelation, we see one great beast from the sea that seems to combine all of the beasts from Daniel chapter 7 into one composite beast. A beast like a lion, a beast like a bear, like a leopard, and a beast with horns. He combines all of the beasts from Daniel 7 into one great beast, a representative of all destructive empires. And here in Revelation, specifically, what? The Roman Empire. Verse 7, again. The beast was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. Conquer. I mean, we've seen that word over and over and over again, right? Throughout Revelation. This beast was given the authority to conquer. The Roman Empire was known for its conquering. Julius Caesar famously said, "I came, I saw, I conquered." The Roman emperors were celebrated for their victories. They were celebrated for conquering people. That's what they were known for. And the early church, the people of God, they experienced the conquest of Rome in a huge way. They experienced terrible persecution at the hands of Emperor Nero just a few years before Revelation was written. Nero had Christians crucified. He had Christians torn apart by wild animals. He lit his imperial gardens using Christians as human torches. Incredible violence. Verse 7 again, or the second part of verse 7. So he was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And this beast was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. So this beast was given authority. Authority over every nation, tribe, and tongue. And of course, how did his authority come? His authority came by subjugating people, by oppressing people. His authority came through violence, military might, through conquest. This beast looks impressive, but its power is deceptive. I want to jump back to verse 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. This fatal wound had been healed. It was a fatal wound. What does that mean? What does that mean? He was dead, but is alive. But alive again. Just like the lamb, right? In fact, it's the same word used in Greek. The word used for slain, referring to the slain lamb, is the same word here, used for wound, in reference to the beast. And this seems like really strange to us. What in the world is this? This head wound, this fatal wound that was healed. What is, that's strange. But we have to once again think about the context. What might that be referring to in the first century? In the first century context. And most scholars believe that John was referring, he's still talking about Emperor Nero here. You see, Nero, he died in AD 68, supposedly through suicide, but many people didn't see his body after he died. Very, very few people saw his body. So there were many people that believed that he didn't really die. So the rumor was that Nero was actually alive, and that he was in hiding, and that someday he would return and he would resume power. That was the rumor of that day. The rumor of that day was that Nero was going to come back from the dead. And there were actually people in the first century who claimed to be Nero, impersonations of Nero. And then Emperor Domitian, who was the emperor at the time Revelation was written, he was also known as a reincarnation of Nero. Some think maybe this could be referring to him as well. So one of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? Who is like the beast?" I mean, this beast tries to impersonate the lamb, right? Who is like the beast? Looks like a lamb, right? But this beast is an imposter. This beast is a counterfeit. This beast from the sea represents military might. This beast from the sea represents power that looks impressive. And people are drawn to power for some reason. Maybe it's because of safety or security or stability, but this kind of power always brings harm to people. It always oppresses people. This is power over people. And this is the true face of empire. It may look impressive, it demands worship, and people may confuse it for good. But it's the opposite of the way of the lamb. It's anti-lamb. So we're presented here with two different kinds of power. The lamb and the beast, they both conquer. In fact, the same word is used for both. They both conquer. But the beast conquers how? The beast conquers through violence, through domination. The lamb conquers through sacrifice. The beast conquers in order to oppress people, to subjugate people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. But the lamb conquers to redeem people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. The beast rises to take life. The lamb rises to give life. The beast's way is all about power over. The lamb's way is always power under. And here's how this section ends. Let me read it again, verse 9. "Whoever has ears, let them hear." If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. That's verse 9 and 10. The message to the churches in the first century is you are not to follow in the way of the beast. You're not to revert to violence, even if it costs you your life. Therefore, this calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. God's people aren't going to be raptured or taken from this world. They need patience to endure the trials and the suffering and the tribulation in this world. The early church was already experiencing it. They needed patient endurance, and so do we. Let's jump now to the second part of this chapter, starting with verse 11. I'm going to read through the end of the chapter. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth as its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands and on their foreheads so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The number is 666. So now we're introduced to the second beast, the beast from the earth. And that completes the unholy Trinity. All the provinces of Rome. Let's talk about this second beast, the beast of the earth, for a second here. All the provinces in Rome, including the cities in Asia Minor where these 7 churches of Revelation were located, they all benefited from Roman rule. And many of these cities, they tried to compete with one another, to try to outdo one another in their allegiance to Rome and bringing honor to the empire. So they built temples, they built shrines and monuments in honor of the great Roman emperors. And these became places of worship. Places you could go to throughout the empire to show your allegiance, to show your honor to the emperor. And so this Roman civic religion began spreading all over the empire, reminders of the greatness and the worthiness of Rome, reminders that the emperor was divine, that the gods had chosen Rome, that Rome and the emperors were the agents of God's rule on earth, that Rome was a special nation, that Rome would bring blessing and security and peace to all the world. Rome was doing great things. And that's the lure of this beast, promoting the good of empire, pointing to the benefit that the empire is providing. And these beast tactics are subtle. Its aim is not the outright worship of evil. That's too obvious. This beast promotes worship of things that are good. It looks like a lamb, performs amazing signs like the lamb. Verse 14 again, because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. This beast looks like a lamb. This second beast actually has an animating breath as well, right? Just like the Spirit of God. The believers in the first century, they would have been familiar with this idea of worshiping an image that's mentioned here. I mean, the 7 churches that John was writing to were right in the midst of all this emperor worship. All 7 cities had civic sites of worship. A few years after Revelation was written, Domitian dedicated this 20-foot tall statue of himself outside the temple in Ephesus. And a few years after that, Christians were executed for refusing to worship the statues of the emperors. And of course, this would have probably brought to mind, a story from the book of Daniel, another story from the book of Daniel, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow to the image of Nebuchadnezzar, who in Daniel is also described as what? A beast. Verses 16 and 17, this beast also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This mark, this was also something that the churches in the first century were very familiar with. The stamps, marks, seals, imperial seals, they were often used for participating in the marketplace. In fact, shortly after this time period, in some of the cities where these churches were located, it became a requirement to offer incense or to offer certain sacrifices before entering the marketplace. These outward signs, seals, marks, were the determining factor of who would be allowed to participate in buying and selling, who would be accepted in society. There was more and more and more political pressure on Christians in the first century to participate in the worship practices of Rome, to devote themselves, to show allegiance to the empire. We've talked about this before, but Rome allowed for the freedom of worship. You could worship any god you liked. You could worship any gods you wanted, as long as you gave your allegiance to Rome as well. You had to give your allegiance to Rome along with your god or gods. And so the main temptation facing the churches at this point was compromise. Maybe it's okay, or could it be okay to participate in the public prayers and festivals if I can benefit from it? Maybe it's okay to offer a sacrifice so that I can set up my booth in the marketplace. Is it okay if I offer a bit of incense here and there to the emperor? I'll just cross my fingers behind my back. I won't really mean it. Is it okay to use money in which the emperors are depicted as gods? How much should they assimilate into the culture of that day? How far should they go in participating in society? And these were the difficult questions facing the churches in the first century. The beast of the earth promotes the worship of earthly kingdoms, empires, nations, and really anything or anyone that demands allegiance. Where does your allegiance lie? Who really has your back? Where does your peace and security really come from? Who is your true provider and sustainer? Where do you find your ultimate belonging and identity? All of this is symbolized by taking a certain mark on their hands or their foreheads. This dreaded mark of the beast. We have a mark here as well. Verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The number is 666. This number 666 has just, incited so much fear over the years in people. My phone number growing up actually started with 666. And I was embarrassed when I told people that was my number. I'd have to say my number is 666, and I was embarrassed. That's actually still my parents' phone number today. They have the same number. But this really isn't complicated at all. I mean, this is actually presented as a riddle to the churches. I mean, the Message actually translates it this way: solve a riddle, put your heads together, and figure out the meaning of the number of the beast. Figure this out. It's a human number, 666. And this is a very easy riddle. It would have been a very easy riddle for them to figure out. They would have gotten it right away. There was an ancient practice called gematria, where they would take the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and they would give each letter a numeric value. So, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on and so forth, although in the Hebrew language. And then they would add up the value of all those letters, and you would get a number. So if you take the name Nero Caesar, you translate it into Hebrew, you add up all the corresponding numbers, and guess what? You get 666. And also, guess what? The word beast. You take the word beast in Greek, translate it to Hebrew, you add that up, and you get 666. It's not really complicated. And you also can look at it this way. It says right there in verse 18 that it's the number of a man, but the word a man, is actually not there in the Greek. It actually says it's the number of man. You also, if you have a physical Bible with you, you may see that there's a footnote there that says that it can also be translated humanity. Now, humanity was created on the 6th day, right? So this is the number of man. It's the number of humanity. And so 7, we know 7 represents perfection. So 777 would be triple perfection. So then what's 666? Represents triple imperfection and falling short. The number represents fallen humanity. It's really close, though. I mean, 6 is close to 7. It's so close. It's a distortion. It's counterfeit. It's a parody of the real thing. For John and the churches in the first century, this number represented allegiance to Nero or maybe Domitian. It definitely represented allegiance to the Roman Empire. But in reality, this number represents allegiance to anyone, all kingdoms of this world, anyone or anything other than the true king, the true Lord of all. Now, I've heard people, I'm sure you've heard people talk all the time. There's all this talk, speculation, fear, speculation, all this stuff, about what this mark might be, what it could mean, talk about credit cards and vaccines with microchips, and there's all kinds of crazy talk out there. Fear of some kind of economic system that's coming sometime in the future, but that's not what this is talking about at all. This is talking about the combining of an economic system with worship. Combining the two, an economic system with worship. So maybe if the government begins telling people who and how they should worship in order to use a credit card, in order to buy and sell, in order to participate in the economy, then maybe we should take notice. It's the combination of economy and worship. It's about allegiance. But once again, this would have been something very practical for the first century churches. It would have been something that they could relate to, something that they could understand, not something from our time and our place and our future. But any way you look at it, this represents allegiance. Who, what do you identify with? Where does your belonging lie? In whom do you put your trust? Ultimately, who has your undivided allegiance? And this is what the unholy Trinity is after, your allegiance. Trying to divide your allegiance. It's represented by a mark on the forehead and the hand, which no doubt, I don't know if anything comes to mind for you guys when you think about a mark on the head and on the hand. For John, no doubt this was contrasting he was contrasting this mark of the beast with the Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 8. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. This is the Shema. And Shema means to listen, to heed, to take heart, to hear. This is the Shema. And 666, the mark of the beast, is the anti-Shema. Who or what has your undivided allegiance? That's the question. Now, remember, in the original manuscripts of the Bible, there are no chapters and verses. Those were added later. So when we come to the end of it looks like the end of chapter 13. It's really not the end. It continues into what looks like chapter 14 for us. And so I want to read the first few verses of chapter 14. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him the 144,000, which we learned earlier is actually a representation of a multitude of people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. People who have his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was that of a harpist playing their harps, and they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins, who follow in the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They were blameless. There's a lot there. But what is being presented here in all of these chapters here, chapter 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14, the beginning of 14, there's a clear connection and there's a clear contrast. There's just a really clear contrast. There are two groups of people. Two groups of people. Those who follow in the way of the dragon and his beasts, and those who love the one and only God with heart and soul and strength, and therefore follow in the way of the Lamb. The contrast, that's the contrast there. And that's the choice. You can't serve two masters. Now, I mean, this isn't just something that would have been challenging to the Roman Empire and to the churches in the first century. This is really challenging for us today as well. First of all, let's talk about power. When it comes to power, and we've talked about this before in this series, but power is so seductive, power is so alluring. We not only seek power and desire power, but we're attracted to it. We're drawn to it, and we're drawn toward powerful people, the power to dominate, the power to win at all costs. That's not the way of the Lamb. It's not the way of the Lamb, and that's clear in the book of Revelation. It's clear throughout Scripture. We shouldn't be looking for a specific antichrist, a specific individual. We should be able to identify and discern the antichrists, plural, among us, in our world, in our churches, and even in ourselves. Anyone who uses power in this way is antichrist. Someone who opposes the way of Christ, the way of the Lamb. In 1 John 2, verse 18, it says, "Dear children, this is the last hour." They thought they were in the end times as well. "You have heard that the Antichrist is coming. Even now, many Antichrists have come." This is how we know it's the last hour. This is how we know it's the end times, because many antichrists have come. I mean, this should be so easy for us to identify. There were many antichrists back then. There are many antichrists here today. And listen, I hate to admit this, but I'm antichrist at times. And this is so difficult for many. It's really difficult. It's even difficult for Christians to get and to understand. The cross will always remain a scandal. The cross is not impressive. The way of the Lamb looks weak. The way of the Lamb doesn't get results. The way of the Lamb seems like losing. It often seems like the way of the Lamb isn't working. When the way of Rome and the way of the kingdoms of this world get things done, the way of the kingdoms of this world can benefit me sometimes and can benefit us sometimes. Craig Keener, who's a Bible scholar, a theologian, and a New Testament seminary professor, he said this: Satan's counterfeits derive their false legitimacy from imitating God. So those who do not embrace the hard message of the cross and its suffering are susceptible to succumbing to the counterfeits. That's so important. Those of us who don't embrace that hard message of the cross are susceptible. We're susceptible to these counterfeits. Anyone who uses power over to dominate, to get their way, to win, no matter how good the cause, no matter the outcome, is opposed to the way of the Lamb, is anti-Christ. Jesus says, by their fruit we'll know them. The Apostle Paul tells us in Galatians that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Power. Now let's talk about worship and allegiance. When it comes to worship, the dragon, or Satan, is using his beasts to trick us into giving our allegiance to lesser gods. Things that look good, things that seem good, things that might benefit us, things like the prosperity gospel, things like Christian nationalism, any form of government, political party, empire, nation, any kind of earthly kingdom. These things are all counterfeit. They're a parody of the real thing. Our God doesn't share allegiance. How do we know? How do we know where our true allegiance lies? How do we know if our allegiance is divided? We show our allegiance who or what we really worship, not by what we believe privately, but what we do publicly. The early church, they could have worshiped God in their hearts. They could have had such a vibrant, very private, personal me and God, or personal us and God type of religion. They could have had that. Rome would have been completely okay with that. No problem at all. This is why I say that the gospel is very political. It's not a private thing. It's not just a personal devotion. To claim that Jesus is king is to claim that the emperor is not, nor anyone or anything besides the true king. And that is reflected not in what we believe, but in how we live our lives. The choices we make, how we spend our money, how we spend our time, how we use our resources, how we treat people, and those things will always cost us something. The early church had tough questions to make. Where might you be tempted to compromise? At work, at school, in the public sphere? Is your allegiance divided? Only you can really answer that question, and maybe the people that are closest to you. Throughout chapter 13 of Revelation, and I encourage you to go back and read chapter 13. You'll see this. There's another contrast. Actually, this contrast is seen throughout the book of Revelation, especially here in chapter 13. But this contrast that's presented is between those who dwell on the earth and those who dwell in heaven. You'll see that if you go back and read chapter 13. There's a contrast between those who dwell on the earth and those who dwell in heaven. And this is not referring to a location. It's referring to allegiance. This is what the Apostle Paul was referring to when he wrote in Philippians that our citizenship is not in heaven. Or our citizenship is not from this world. Our citizenship is in heaven. This is what Jesus meant when he said that his kingdom is not from this world. We are in this world. That's our location. But we're not of this world. Our allegiance. Those who dwell in heaven, The people of God from every nation, every tribe, every tongue, those who follow in the way of the Lamb are part of an entirely different kingdom. An entirely different kingdom. An altogether different kingdom from any and all earthly kingdoms. That's where our allegiance should lie. Citizens of that kingdom give their undivided allegiance to the one and only kingdom. And why should we not? Why should we not? Because who is like our God? Can you say that with me again? Who is like our God? No one. Worship team, you can come up. As the worship team comes up, I want to return really briefly to Daniel chapter 7 where we started. Daniel chapter 7 where we learned about the beasts. At the end of that same chapter, there's this incredible vision of the Son of Man. The Son of Man coming on the clouds. This Son of Man, which we actually talked about earlier in the series in Revelation when we looked at the first chapter of Revelation. This Son of Man who comes on the clouds, and he conquers these powerful beasts. He conquers these oppressive, deceptive kingdoms of this world. In verse 14 of Daniel 7, it says, he was given authority. The Son of Man was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is the one that will never be destroyed. When did that happen? When was he given all authority and all power? At the cross. At the cross. So let's always remember, we have to always remember that his death, it was his death and his defeat that brought forth his victory. It was his death, his defeat that brought forth his victory, his sacrifice. And it's the same for us. It's the same for his people today.